This is an ABC News special report. The state visit of King Charles III. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good morning, everyone. We're coming on the air for a special event at the White House at this hour. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump hosting a ceremonial welcome for King Charles and Queen Camilla. This is the royal couple's first trip to the U.S. as king and queen. Their trip is both a celebration of 250 years of American independence, as well as a very delicate exercise in foreign diplomacy. America's closest ally coming to repair the strained relationship with the U.S. Buckingham Palace calling this visit an opportunity to recognize the shared history of our two nations. The king's visit coming, of course, just days after the attempted assassination of President Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. King Charles' arrival also comes amid stalled peace talks to end the war in Iran. President Trump has lashed out at the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the rest of NATO for not joining the U.S. military in the operation, which was launched without consulting U.S. allies. Of course, also looming over the royal visit, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, which led to the arrest of the king's brother, Andrew. Later this afternoon, King Charles will address both houses of Congress, where he will stress the importance of the special relationship between the U.S. and the U.K. ABC News will carry that live as well. We're going to see the president, the first lady, momentarily, and then they will welcome the king and queen there at the south portico of the White House. Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent, watching on. And of course, Mary, as I mentioned here, this comes at a pivotal moment in the relationship between the U.S. and the U.K.
It certainly does, David. We are seeing a moment of really heightened tension between the U.S. and the U.K., especially over the war with Iran. The president has been furious that the U.K. has refused to join in this effort, even though, as you note, the president didn't give them a heads up or consult them before launching this operation. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has said that it was a war of choice, and that did not sit well with the president. The ceremony now getting underway, David.
Mary, thank you. As we can see, the vice president there, members of the cabinet making their way to welcome the king and queen to Washington. King Charles and Queen Camilla here on a 4-day visit, as I mentioned, to mark the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence. The last official visit by a British monarch was Queen Elizabeth back in 2007. Queen Elizabeth was also the first and only royal to address Congress, as the king will do later today, something Charles will do. We see the First Lady we saw the Vice President, Secretary Pete Hegseth there, a number of cabinet officials, the Treasury Secretary right there, Susie Wiles, Chief of Staff, of course. The King and Queen landed in Washington yesterday. Of course, right afterward, they met with President Trump and the First Lady, Melania Trump, at the White House for tea, and then attended a garden party at the British ambassador's residence, where they met House Speaker Mike Johnson and members of the Trump administration. As you can see, a bit of a rainy, slightly gray day in Washington. King Charles, of course, has been to the United States many times, at least 19 times by our count. But this is his first official state visit since becoming king in 2022. You're looking at the UK delegation now arriving at the south portico of the White House. We have not seen the president or the First Lady yet. Our chief international correspondent, James Longman, also with us here this morning as we watch this play out. And James, we know the president was invited for quite a visit last fall to the UK.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's the only president to have received 2 state visits to the United Kingdom. So the US is now doing its best to show King Charles what it can do in terms of pomp and ceremony. Every single branch of the US military will give him an honor guard here. That is one honor that he can look forward to. I'm just going to, you've seen the UK delegation there come out of the bus there. There's the British Foreign Secretary. You can see there in the blue jacket, Yvette Cooper. Now, with protocol, she has to be here alongside the king as the representative of the government, because this is, as you say, an incredibly delicate diplomatic exercise. She will be very heavily involved in briefing the king on talking points that he should and should not breach with President Trump when they have a moment together later in private in the Oval Office. Behind her, that is Christian Turner. He is the current UK ambassador, and many of those watching at home will know that the former British ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, was fired over his links to Jeffrey Epstein. So it just shows what is at stake here and the issues that are looming over this entire trip. That is not a topic I would imagine that King Charles will want to bring up with the president. It may be something that the president wants to discuss with him because, of course, Andrew, the king's brother, has been shunned and pushed out of public life as a result of his association with Jeffrey Epstein. I should say that neither man, Peter Mandelson nor Andrew, have been charged with any crime, but there are ongoing investigations into both of them. But this is, as you say, like a very, very, very delicate time for the United Kingdom, and I think the government back home in London will be watching, hoping that something can be done to try to mend the relationship, because it has been very, very difficult between the two countries, not just over Iran. I think tariffs was another part of another American US White House policy which really affected the United Kingdom. What is happening in the Strait of Hormuz at the moment is really, really hurting European economies. And of all the European economies, it is the British one which, according to a recent report, is being impacted the most. So there's a lot of work here for the king to do, over and above the pomp and circumstance that we're all watching today. David.
James, thank you. James will be with us all morning long, and of course for the joint address later today by the king across the Capitol there on Capitol Hill. That's later today. Again, the first royal to do that since his mother, Queen Elizabeth. You heard James talking about the tension between the U.S. and U.K. over foreign policy and other issues. President Trump telling the BBC in a phone interview just days ago that King Charles' visit to the U.S. could in fact lay the groundwork to repair U.S. relations with the United Kingdom. The president saying of King Charles, he's fantastic. He said, I know him well. I've known him for years. He's a brave man, a great man. They would absolutely have a positive visit. The BBC also asking the president about the war with Iran that the UK did not later join after the US began the war without consulting the allies. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, resisting calls to join in along with other allies. President Trump saying, I didn't need them at all, but they should have been there. I didn't need them, obviously, he said, of the UK's refusal to get involved. And Mary Bruce, we should also point out here that the image is also striking this morning for a different reason. You know, we're seeing all the members of the cabinet really together again for the first time since those harrowing moments on Saturday evening.
David, it's hard not to think of that as you watch these images here, that this is the first time we've seen members of the cabinet together like this, the first time we've seen such a large-scale event since those horrific, chaotic scenes on Saturday night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. This town is still very much in shock, still reeling from that horrific attempted shooting. And now I think this is obviously a very different situation, different security circumstances, but it comes as this town and the White House are really asking still a lot of big questions about security protocol surrounding the president. But today is certainly intended to be a joyful celebration, one that we know President Trump has really been looking forward to, as the UK, it seems, is hoping to use this display of soft power, as they say, to try and smooth over some of that tension. But despite the president's rather harsh words publicly about Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as tension has been growing, the president has had nothing but positive words to say about the king. He really values their relationship. As you note, he's called him a good friend, a wonderful man. And we all know that President Trump also enjoys these grand displays. Certainly back in September when he visited the UK, I was there. They spent a very lavish day together at Windsor Castle. We all remember that gilded carriage ride through the grounds, that review of troops. This is really a chance for the president to try and return that favor to the king.
The president at the time, Mary, as you'll remember, you were there, said this is one of the great honors of my lifetime when he was invited to the UK. And as James pointed out, not once, but twice. for 2 state visits.
Yeah, something that no other president has had, the first American to get those 2 state visits to the UK. As you were noting, it's now been nearly 20 years since we saw a royal visit like this to the US. But yeah, the president said it was one of the highest honors of his life, and he really does love the royal family. He has a personal connection, a family connection. His mother was born in Scotland. She also was a great admirer of the monarchy, so perhaps something she passed on to her son, President Trump. And I suspect we will see certainly a pleasant and warm welcome here in just a few minutes, David.
It's not lost on us, thank you, Mary, that not only are we watching, but the world is watching this. The audience back in the UK and across Europe during this moment with so many different issues on the world stage playing out, and this sort of juxtaposition, this deep, deep respect for the royal family from President Trump, while at the same time very critical of the current UK leadership. The president has called the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, a loser over his refusal to assist the U.S. In the war with Iran, and has repeatedly said that Starmer is no Winston Churchill. Quote he returns to often when asked about Starmer and the leadership in the UK. And Victoria Murphy, our royal contributor, also in the U.S. Capitol today for this visit. And Victoria, great to see you as always. And King Charles certainly aware of the dynamics at play and his role. I know this visit was planned long before, with the 250th birthday coming up, but he does come at a time where there is some tension.
Good morning, David. Really great to see you. And yet I think watching this ceremonial arriving this morning, we're really very acutely aware of the grand state occasion that this is and the moment in history that this is. And we will see that again with the King's address to Congress this afternoon. As you say, recent events have made it very high stakes and very tricky for the King. This visit has essentially been in the planning since Queen Elizabeth came to the US in 1976 for the bicentennial, but recent events have made it very high stakes, and the King is really walking a tightrope here. He needs to use that soft power of the monarchy to have influence, but he can't stray into politics. He also needs to extend that gesture of friendship to President Trump, but he also needs to stay aligned with the Prime Minister who has sent him and the government that he represents. So very tricky. But the mood music coming from the British Embassy, from the royal family on this, and I was hearing from the British ambassador the other night, and he was saying what they really want to achieve with this is to have a visit that reaches through the ages. And that is really something that the monarchy very uniquely can do, because there are so many echoes of history here with Queen Elizabeth's previous visits, her father, King George VI's first state visit. And that is really what they are trying to achieve with this visit here today.
Victoria, we were looking back through history at King Charles and the number of visits to the U.S. I had mentioned a moment ago, at least 19 times by our count. First visited the U.S. back in 1970. He was 21 years old, Prince of Wales, of course. His sister, Princess Anne, came as well. They were both guests of the Nixons at the time. And we know that King Charles last visited in 2018 to attend the funeral of former President George H.W. Bush. I was struck, though, Victoria, that King Charles visited the U.S. with Camilla. Of course, she was then the Duchess of Cornwall, on their first joint official tour all the way back in 2005. So that was more than 20 years ago. They visited the U.S. together. Now they come as king and queen.
Exactly, King Charles's first ever state visit, his first visit as king. But as you've just outlined there, all of those previous visits going all the way back to his first one in 1970 really shows you the breadth of the relationship that he developed with the US as Prince of Wales. And it also shows us the breadth of his diplomatic experience, which absolutely comes into play in visits like this. Interesting you mentioned 2005, because of course that was not long after Charles and Camilla were married. And I do think it's worth saying on this visit, Princess Diana, a very, very popular figure still here in the US. And here we have Camilla coming as queen, and there was previously controversy about her using that title. But we have really seen in the UK, she is very much an accepted figure. And the way that she has done that is by going out and meeting people on engagements. And that's something that we are going to see her do here on this trip with the US public, particularly in New York and Virginia in the coming days, really getting to show a bit of her personality and meet people on the ground in this country.
I think you make a really strong point there, Victoria, in pointing out, reminding the audience, although they don't need reminding, that Princess Diana obviously was a very beloved figure, not only in the world stage, but here in the U.S. during her visits to the U.S. Back when she was with the royal family and even after the split with then Prince Charles. But the public here in the U.S. has had a couple of decades now to witness this relationship in public and to see them as king and queen and how they've carried themselves. And when you hear President Trump talk about the bravery of King Charles, Victoria, no doubt he's talking about this public battle with cancer and the way he has carried himself, the message that he has repeatedly delivered, that he is among the millions who battle this. And we've also seen Queen Camilla and her strength as well, being there for her husband and for the British people.
Absolutely, and you make such a good point because it's such an easy thing to forget because it's hardly ever referenced anymore by the palace. We do know that King Charles is continuing to receive ongoing cancer treatment, but we do not get regular updates about his health. We still do not know exactly what kind of treatment he is receiving or what kind of cancer he has been treated for. So this is something that is very much sort of faded into the background into comparison to when he was first diagnosed, and it was very much front and center. But what he has shown us is that he is absolutely determined to continue with his duties, continue with his work, and his program at the moment is as if there was nothing going on. It's a completely normal program with overseas travel, with lots of domestic engagements at home in the UK in normal times. And that really is reflective of his very, very strong commitment to duty and to his role. And that underpins everything that he does. Of course, that was passed on from his mother, Queen Elizabeth, and he continues to show that that's how he wants to fulfill his role.
A busy schedule, Victoria, here in the U.S., but the palace did make it clear that he won't be seeing his son, Prince Harry, while here.
No, that's right. We know that he won't be seeing Harry. I mean, a state visit funded by the government and to carry out very important diplomatic affairs isn't really the time for him to be going over to make a personal visit to his son. So it does make sense that they're saying he's not going to do that. But of course, having the king here in the US does very much turn thoughts to Prince Harry because Harry has made the country his home. And we know that things are still very tricky between King Charles and his youngest son. They have met in recent months, but we understand that the things still are difficult and it's a complicated situation, and that is something that has come up in the context of this visit.
Victoria Murphy with us here this morning. Victoria, stand by here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise if you are able, as honors are rendered to the President and remaining standing for the arrival of their Majesties, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, and the playing of the national anthems of the United Kingdom and the United States.
Present, march!
We know the King and Queen have left Blair House.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and First Lady Melania Trump.
have the moment. King Charles, Queen Camilla, officially greeting President Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, after having spent some time with them yesterday afternoon and evening after arriving in Washington.
Shoulder, right, shoulder, arch.
They now make their way to the dais together. And in a moment, the Presidential Salute Battery will render a 21-gun cannon salute. King Charles, Queen Camilla shaking hands with members of the cabinet. Vice President Vance there, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, of course, Treasury Secretary Bessent, Susie Wiles, they just shook hands with, of course, and making their way down the line. The president there as well, with his entire cabinet now shaking the hands of some of the British dignitaries who are here as well, but they head up to the dais for what will be a presentation now for the President, the First Lady, and the King and Queen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the national anthem of the United Kingdom, followed by the national anthem of the United States.
Present, present, arch.
beautiful to hear. The U.S. Marine Band there with the national anthems, of course, of both countries.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
The President, His Majesty, accompanied by the Commander of Troops, will inspect the troops on parade. The very first pass and review at the White House. Of course, the tradition of the pass and review dates to the 18th century. And originally was meant for an incoming commander, an opportunity to inspect the troops, make sure they're ready for combat. They will now inspect together. James Longman watching along with us here this morning, our chief international correspondent. And James, this image, you're here stateside for a change, but this image also playing out back in the UK and across Europe, and certainly is a powerful one given the dynamic of what's been playing out.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I mean, I'm looking at this image now and I'm reminded of that moment when Donald Trump walked alongside the late Queen at Windsor when she took him to inspect the trooping of the colour as it is in the United Kingdom. And yeah, I think this is something that Britain needs, put very simply, you know, and I think already I feel the atmosphere here. It is quite rousing, I have to say. I mean, the music was playing there, both national anthems, and by the way, I don't know if you can come to me here, they're going to pass right by us inspecting this military guard of honor. And as the national anthems played, we had the cannons just beyond the crowds here, just in front of the Washington Monument, south of the White House, firing, and the gunpowder and the smoke washed over us whilst the music was playing, and it really was quite a moment, you know. And as a Brit, someone who comes from a country where we do pomp and pageantry, this was special. And that's exactly what I think the White House wants to do, to show the King that he's welcome here, he's a friend. And I have a feeling that Donald Trump will be very happy with how things are going so far. The rain, by the way, also just cleared. And, you know, you escaped British rule 250 years ago, but you didn't quite escape British weather today, although just when the King and the President came out from the White House, the weather did clear, luckily. But yes, I mean, look, I think Britain is pinning its hopes. The British government watching back in London now, hoping that in the moment that these two men will have privately in the Oval Office, that some good can come from their meeting. And I think more than Britain, NATO more broadly, European allies, because I think this is a man who is a world leader. And I think it's fair to say other European countries, NATO, have felt that there has been some uncertain allyship from the United States these last few months with criticism of Ukraine. And so I think they'll be hoping for quite a lot from this meeting. But I think the President's about to speak.
How you going, all right?
The President will deliver remarks here on the South Lawn. The President also knowing full well that this isn't just an important and symbolic moment domestically, but that the world is watching, European allies watching. And we have a 250th birthday approaching here in this country. This, of course, planned well in advance of the world events playing out. As you can see on your screen, this is the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps performing for the President and the King.
Take that. Easy. Mr. President, please done.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Thank you very much, everybody. What a beautiful British day this is. And it really is. Your Majesties, members of the British delegation, friends, service members, and distinguished guests, welcome to the beautiful White House. Great honor to have you. Melania and I will never forget the spectacular honor Your Majesties showed us during our extraordinary visit to Windsor Castle last September. Now it is our tremendous privilege to host you, and you're going to have a wonderful short stay, but stay nevertheless. Then you're going over to Congress, and you're going to make a speech that's going to make everybody very envious of that beautiful accent of yours. Very elegant. He's a very elegant man. Here in the shadows of monuments to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, honoring the British King might seem an ironic beginning to our celebration of 250 years of American independence. But in fact, no tribute could be more appropriate. Long before Americans had a nation or a constitution, we first had a culture, a character, and a creed. Before we ever proclaimed our independence, Americans carried within us the rarest of gifts, moral courage, and it came from a small but mighty kingdom from across the sea. For nearly 2 centuries before the Revolution, this land was settled and forged by men, women who bore in their souls the blood and noble spirit of the British. Here on a wild and untamed continent, they set loose the ancient English love of liberty and the Great Britain's distinctive sense of glory, destiny, and pride. And that's what it is, glory, destiny, and pride. The American patriots who pledged their lives to independence in 1776 were the heirs to this majestic inheritance. Their veins ran with Anglo-Saxon courage. Their hearts beat with an English faith in standing firm for what is right, good, and true. In recent years, we've often heard it said that America is merely an idea, but the cause of freedom did not simply appear as an intellectual invention of 1776. The American founding was the culmination of hundreds of years of thought, struggle, sweat, blood, and sacrifice on both sides of the Atlantic. Fate drew a long arc from the meadow at Runnymede to the streets of Philadelphia that ran through the lives of people born and bred on the British code that no man should be denied either justice or right. American patriots today can sing "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty," only because our colonial ancestors first sang, "God save the King." We see today a living symbol of this centuries-old bond, just a few dozen feet to the left where I stand. There, Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, an incredible woman who I had the privilege of getting to know. Queen Elizabeth II, very, very special woman who is very greatly missed on both sides of that mighty Atlantic. Long ago planted a young tree. It was a very young and beautiful tree, and look at it now. It's tripled in size and tripled in strength, very much as our nations have even more than tripled. Like our nation itself, it was laid with British hands but grew in American soil. Today it stands tall and proud, reaching ever higher. And this morning it reminds us that the mightiest of trees like the greatest of nations, must be anchored by the strongest and deepest of roots. In the centuries since we won our independence, Americans have had no closer friends than the British. We share that same root. We speak the same language. We hold the same values. And together our warriors have defended the same extraordinary civilization under twin banners of red, white, and blue. My wonderful mother, Mary MacLeod, was born in Stornoway, Scotland, the Hebrides, and that's what they call very serious Scotland. There's no question about it. Some places they say, well, it wasn't really Scotland. The Hebrides, that's real serious Scotland. That's where they had their greatest of warriors, their greatest of warriors. She came to America at 19, met my incredible father. We loved him so much. We all loved him. We loved her. We loved him, Fred, and they were married for 63 years. And excuse me if you don't mind. That's a record we won't be able to match, darling. I'm sorry. Just not going to work out that way. We'll do well, but we're not going to do that well. 63 years. And my mother, I just see it so clearly. She loved, and I told the king this, she loved the royal family, and she loved the queen. And anytime the queen was involved in a ceremony or anything, my mother would be glued to the television, and she'd say, look, Donald, look how beautiful that is. She really did love the family, but I also remember her saying very clearly, Charles, look, young Charles, he's so cute. It's my mother. My mother had a crush on Charles. Can you believe it? Amazing how, I wonder what she's thinking right now. But beneath those beautiful flags, 8 decades ago, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin Roosevelt famously met on a ship in the North Atlantic to outline a vision for the free world after World War II. That understanding of our nation's unique bond and role in history is the essence of our special relationship, and we hope it will always remain that way. The ship where the two great leaders met was called the Prince of Wales, the very title that His Majesty the King held longer than any other individual in British history, and he held it with great pride and respect. It's said that when Prime Minister Churchill first met this future king many decades ago, he was so impressed, he made the statement, he is so young to think so much and so well. And the bust of your great Prime Minister rests proudly again in the Oval Office. We're very proud to bring it back. We brought it back. Throughout His Majesty's life, the world has witnessed that same thoughtfulness which first struck Britain's greatest Prime Minister. His Majesty's intellect, passion, and devotion have been really a blessing to the British people, but not only to his own country, but to the cherished bond between the United States and the United Kingdom. And I am very certain that it will continue that way long into the future. In a few hours, His Majesty will stand in the heart of the United States Capitol as the very first British king ever to address a joint session of the United States Congress. So he's going to be addressing Congress, and I'm going to be watching. I was thinking of going, but they said, I don't know, that might be a step too far. I would love to go. It's not supposed to be protocol, but I would love to be with you. But there, the direct descendant of King George III will speak to the direct successor of the very body that gathered in Independence Hall on July 4th, 1776. If John Adams and George Washington or the King's fifth great-grandfather could see that sight, they might be absolutely shocked, but probably only for a moment. Surely they would be delighted that the wounds of war healed into the most cherished friendship. Think of that very, very long ago difficult war, and yet those wounds did indeed heal into the most cherished of friendships, most cherished. They would be moved beyond words to know that the soldiers who once called each other Redcoats and Yankees became the Tommies and the GIs who together saved the free world as brothers in arms and brothers in eternity, and nobody fought better together than us. If they could see us today, our ancestors would surely be filled with awe and pride that the Anglo-American Revolution in human freedom was never, ever extinguished, but carried forward across centuries, across oceans, and across history until it became a fire that lit the entire world. So today we look back on 250 years. Let us remember what has made our countries the two most exceptional nations the world has ever known. And together let us go forward with even stronger resolve to carry on our sacred devotion to liberty and to the traditions of excellence that have been our shared gift of all mankind. Your Majesties, thank you once again for making this important visit. We are so honored. May God forever bless the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
President Trump with words there, the South Lawn of the White House, shaking King Charles' hand, obviously, saying no closer friends than the U.S. and the British, pointing out our warriors have defended together. And as the 250th anniversary of this nation approaches, the president saying the wounds of war all those years ago have healed into the most cherished of friendships.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise if you are able for the conclusion of the ceremony and departure of the official party.
Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent. Mary, we know the president not only enjoys the pomp and circumstance, but as he made it very clear, his love of the royal family goes back to his own mother, Mary. He talked about his mother being married to his father, Fred, for 63 years, turned to the First Lady Melania Trump and said, "I'm sorry, we're not going to make it that long." Quite a joke there. And then turned and told the king that my mother once thought that Prince Charles was quite cute.
David, the president's sense of humor certainly on display here this morning as well. As we were discussing, he loves the royal family, and that was clear, something that was passed along to him by his own mother as he was a child, and something that is fully on display here today as well. And that was an incredibly warm welcome from President Trump. There certainly was no hint of the simmering tension between our two nations. The president not making any mention of that, instead discussing the enduring, lasting bond between our two countries, what he called a cherished bond. He spoke of the lasting connection between our countries, our shared history, though he did note what he described as this ironic beginning to celebrating American 250 and our independence, David.
We await the flyover now. It'll consist of 4 F-35s flying south to north. As you can see, the President, the First Lady, Their Majesties King Charles, Queen Camilla have made themselves up to the Blue Room balcony. It is from that balcony right there they'll watch a pass and review. and then the flyover, which we are told will play out momentarily, though we weren't sure earlier this morning, given the weather as it's playing out in Washington. You heard the president there joke that it is quite a British morning in Washington, D.C., given the gray skies and the rain. Just some laughter in the crowd. Shared a little humor with our James Longman, who made the same joke or a similar one earlier, although I will say spring here in the East has been a rainy and gray one, so we can't blame it entirely on the British, that's for sure. Some laughter exchanged on that balcony, and this was a relationship, James, that they wanted on full display today.
Yeah, look, I think, and as I watch these four there, I think what people don't maybe recognize is the pair, Charles and Camilla together. That is really what has softened Charles in the eyes of the British public. And it's often, I think, their secret weapon. When they come together on these foreign trips, it's their clear adoration for one another. There's a feeling in Britain that they should have always been together from the very beginning. And however people feel about Diana, there is a sense that now, with Camilla alongside him, Charles has the partner he always needed. She's very funny. She is very funny in private, and she softens him. And I think genuinely, I think Donald Trump enjoys the company of these two because there's humor in the conversation. And that's what we saw today. I think there was probably some nervousness back in London that he might make a joke there about Keir Starmer, because he's been known to do that, the British Prime Minister. He didn't do that. He leant very heavily on his memories of Queen Elizabeth, and that's something that everybody in Britain will love to hear, because she is still adored in the UK. A lovely, lovely point there made about the tree that was planted on the South Lawn here by Queen Elizabeth years ago, 30 years ago. It is now, I'm looking at it, hoping that it's an oak tree. Someone will tell me later I'm wrong, but it's this beautiful tree that sits very close to the White House. And that was a lovely moment. I think I didn't realize that was the case. And this is the beginning of what will hopefully be a positive trip for the UK government.
No question about that, James. Thank you. And stay with us here. They're now watching, as you know, from that balcony, about 300 United States service members, 500 members of the U.S. Armed Forces from all 6 military branches being represented in this ceremony here before the flyover. This part of the ceremony right here, an historic first for state visits. And James, I loved the point about the tree as well. It has tripled in size since it was planted. And in strength, and the president connecting that to the relationship between the U.S., the U.K., and certainly its connection to Queen Elizabeth, who was, beloved not only back in the U.K., but here in the U.S. during her visits. And I do wonder if there will be some humor on display from King Charles, as we saw from the Queen back when she addressed a joint session of Congress. Victoria Murphy, the power of this moment, the symbolism and the image of the four who are gathered here on this balcony. What do you see when you look at this image?
Absolutely, it's very powerful, and with the music as well, it's impossible not to feel quite moved by this, and that sort of sense of kind of emotional connection, which I think it has been hoped that this trip will engender. And I think we really see that in action here. Listening to President Trump there, I mean, extraordinarily personal speech that he made there. And I think getting right to the crux of why this trip can be so impactful. And it is that relationship that his mother had and that he has with Queen Elizabeth and the royal family.
We await the flyover. James Longman, if you're listening, I just looked this up on my phone. Apparently, the Queen planted a little leaf linden tree on the south lawn of the White House, planted to replace the linden that was originally planted in 1937 by her father, King George VI. So it's a linden, but not a bad guess. I'm sure there are many oaks there on the south lawn as well. And here's the flyover. 4 F-35s in formation. lying south to north over the nation's capital. Applause from the president there. President Trump, First Lady Melania Trump. You can see the president thanking those who are gathered there on the South Lawn. King Charles, Queen Camilla will now join the president and the First Lady in the Blue Room to participate in a receiving line on the state floor there as well, inside the White House. But that is the royal ceremony, the royal welcome at the White House for the King and the Queen.